Let's start. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Mags, and what I'd like to talk to you guys about today is my workplace experience after graduating. And I really want to focus on, what I actually do on a day-to-day basis, because, I think it's cool, but I also think I can provide some really good, valuable insights to you guys as well, because it's probably something that you guys might not be aware of if you're still in uni, for example. So a little bit about myself first. That's what I looked like 12 years ago. I had to grow a beard to make myself look more serious. But yeah, I've spent the last 12 years working in various technical roles. I started my career as a developer, where all I did was, write code. And then I kind of went through a few different roles. So I was a build manager for a while, where not so much about developing, it's more about moving the code across different places. I was also a development lead where I was managing a team of developers, and again, not so much developing, but more about guiding them, mentoring them, and checking their code was okay, allocating tasks to them, that kind of stuff. And my last role was as a technical architect, where again it was like a step away from coding, but focusing more on designing solutions and putting in place the building blocks to allow the rest of my team to do what they had to do, deliver on project milestones and such. And then what I do right now, I am a senior application developer at a company called ElectroRent. And what I do, I guess it's kind of like a combination of all my previous roles. Um, so yeah, let's talk about the outline of today. I'll talk a little bit about my experiences at university. Then we'll talk about what I do right now. And then we'll get to the main topic of today, which is an application called Finance and Operations. And that's what I develop and support every day, pretty much. And then we'll do a roundup. And yeah, like I said, we'll have time for questions. So yeah, if you do have any questions, just file them away, type them away, and then we'll get around to it at the end. So university, I would say, well, before I go into university, I just want to talk about the overarching theme of today, and it's really about workplace insights. Because those of you at uni right now, or maybe there's people who are thinking of transitioning into a programming type career, there's really a lack of, I guess, exposure to what you do in the real world after you've left uni. What kind of tools and technologies that you actually do get around to using. And definitely for myself anyway, when I was at uni, I was kind of going into the workplace kind of blindsided because I had no idea what I was what I was getting myself into. So yeah, this talk is focused on beginners. I will use kind of some terminology which you might not know, but I'll try my best to explain. So university, this was me at university, and maybe you guys are in the same position as well. But there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because university is where you learn and you make mistakes, and you just grow as a person. So it wasn't really until my final year dissertation where I built a fantasy football website, which kind of inspired me to want to get into a career of programming. And that's really what kind of drove me to pursue this career that I'm doing right now. So after I left university, I was, I spent a year looking for a job, I'd say. I did find that graduate opportunities were easier. I had more chance with graduate opportunities because everyone else was looking for, people with experience. And having just left university, I had zero experience. So luckily, after about a year, I landed myself a job in an application or developing in an application called Dynamics AX. And I'll talk about that in a lot more detail later. And it also got me introduced to a programming language called X++. You might not have heard of X++, but think of it as a combination of C# and Java. But yeah, like I said, I had no idea about either of these. So for me, it was just a lot of learning on the job, which was challenging, but thankfully I had a manager who was really cool, answered all my silly questions, and yeah, he also threw me into a lot of like tough situations, which I struggled with at times. But then it does make you learn makes you learn a lot quicker as well at a lot of times. So that was kind of my early career. And then fast forward to what I do right now. I work at a company called ElectroRent. And what we do is we rent and lease electronic test and measure equipment to customers globally and across a wide range of industries. And to help us do that, we have a whole bunch of IT systems. And one of those systems is called Dynamics 365. Within Dynamics 365, we have another application called Finance and Operations, which is the application that I support every day pretty much. So you can think of Finance and Operations as a system everyone in the company logs into every day as they come into work. So whether it's someone in the accounts payable department and let's say they have to pay supplier invoices, or if it's someone in the warehouse and they need to receive some goods in, all those different types of processes you can do within Finance and Operations. So it's a massive system, and you can do a whole bunch of things in relation to operating your actual business. Also important to say, it is cloud-based. You guys have probably used a lot of cloud-based systems before, but for ElectroRent, it's really useful because it means we don't need to have a physical room in our building, in our offices somewhere, and we don't have to think about maintaining those computers. We don't have to think about all the costs associated with that. And so what we do is we've kind of offloaded that to our cloud service provider called Microsoft, and they run all that, and all we do is just connect to our applications, right? We just connect and we pay as you go. There's loads of pros and cons about cloud-based systems, and I'll leave a link at the end as well where you can learn a little bit more. So going on to the good stuff, Finance and Operations. This section is really heavily demo orientated because I really want to show, like I said, I want to show you guys what I actually do. So let's talk about environments first. So normally when you're involved in developing an application at a largish scale, you're going to need environments. And when I say environments, I mean a separate place to do specific things. So in our case, we have lots of development environments, and that's where our developers write code. And we could have quite a few developers at certain times, and they'll all be writing code in the development environment. And then we have a couple of test environments. So that's where we test the code that we write. And then we have the final environment called production. That's our big environment, right? Because that's the environment all our users, all our employees log into on a every day. And we can't mess around in production, because if you mess around in production, if you do something you're not supposed to, it could have a real life impact on our business, as much as like taking our business down, for example, which is obviously very bad. So we treat production very seriously and very carefully. So like, for example, if we wanted to update production, in our case, we can only do it on the weekends, because that's the window of opportunity where no one uses the system, and we can bring the system down, make our updates, and then bring it back up again. So let's look at what Finance and Operation is actually like. So if I go here, I'm still here. Okay, so this is essentially it, right? I've logged into one of our development environments, and you can see here, all I do to log in, it is cloud-based. I just type in a URL and I log in, and I'm faced with this homepage, as it were. So I guess one of the pros of this job is because it's everything, a lot of it's cloud-based, so I can do what I need to. As long as I have an internet connection, it doesn't matter where I am in the world, I can do my job. So going back to Finance and Operations, here's a home page. If I click on the left, I'll have a bunch of modules. So depending on the type of role you do at the company, you'll only see a couple of these buttons, because you don't want to overwhelm the user with the employee with a whole bunch of buttons they don't need to see. I'm logged in as an administrator right now, so hence I can see all the different available options to me. But say I was in accounts payable, I'd probably only need to see the accounts payable menu. And so I don't know, let's pretend I'm in accounts payable and I want to see all the customers in my company, right? All our customers, all our vendors. So I click on accounts payable, click on all vendors, and just to point out, this is not real life data because I'm not allowed to show you that, but this is kind of like a set of demo data. So I have to switch what we call companies. Let's go to the US company here. And here you go. So we call this like a list page. It's kind of like an overview of all our customers that we deal with. If I want to see more details, our vendors. If I want to see more details of a vendor, I click on this vendor and there you go. I'll have more details. That's a very basic thing you can do in the system, right? There's a whole bunch of other things I can do, like processing invoices, all that kind of stuff. So say I was like, I don't know, in accounts receivable department and I want to see all my customers. Very similar. I can click on all customers and I can see a whole list of customers here. And a whole bunch of buttons I can click if I wanted to click on them. That's kind of a quick overview of what the front end of finance and operation looks like. So let's talk about the technical components behind this environment. We have I guess we can call it a portal called Lifecycle Services, and this is very is only for finance and operations, right? So if you're developing another application, there might be another portal, but there's different ways depending on which application you're developing on. For our case, so what I do, if I want to log into an environment, I come to this page. You can see here a list of all our environments. We have a couple of dev environments, a couple of test environments, and you can think of these as all like PCs in the cloud hosted by Microsoft, and all I'm doing is connecting to these environments. So I've connected one to one already. Well, to connect to one, what I do here is I'd click on this download link and it will download what we call a remote desktop link. And that will enable me to put in my username, put in my password, and then that will take me to the actual server itself, which looks something like this. So it's kind of like, well, the operating system here is Windows Server, right? So it's not the same as your typical Windows. But all the components we need to run finance and operation is within this one machine here, that specific application that I showed you just earlier. So for example, if you look into here, you can see we have SQL Server and a couple of SQL Server databases, because finance and operations doesn't work without a database. So we have all the components needed to run a database all within this machine. We have a whole bunch of other services that sit within this computer that you need to run finance and operations. I mean, not all of them are needed, but a lot of them do require to be running in order to operate the finance and operations application. So development. So how do I actually do development on this machine? So to do development, we use a application called Visual Studio, 2019 version here. Looks a little bit like this. You might have come across Visual Studio before, but it's essentially a integrated development environment. So think of it as a way where we can easily write and test code. Because yeah, you can use Notepad if you wanted to, but you just be there all day just writing code and not getting anywhere. So Visual Studio kind of helps us out, gives us little tips and makes us write code quicker. So I'll show you a couple of concepts within Visual Studio. We have what we call application object tree. And this is, so if you remember, I showed you a couple of forms earlier, right? And just to run one of those forms, there's a whole bunch of objects that sit in the background, and I can find those objects within the application object tree. So say, I can do find here, I can do like filters and all kinds of searching mechanisms. But say I wanted to change a form. So say that all customers form I showed you, say I wanted to add a button to that form. what I would do is find that form within the application object tree, add it to my project on the right here, and then that will enable me to make changes as I want. I've got one open here already, actually. So this is a class, and I'll show you very quickly what the class looks like. It's just a whole bunch of code here. And this is where we'd write code, and we can save the code, we can compile the code, and make sure it's working. Again, a very very quick overview because we only have 30 minutes. So I'm showing you, I'm trying to cram all I can into that time. I also want to talk about source control because while you're at university, you're probably isolated to your single workstation, right? You just do your lab and then do everything within that one machine. But when you're developing in an application and you're working with, we can have up to 10 developers at the same time. We need to use source control, and think of source control as a central repository of code. So I'll be doing my code, and then we call it checking in. Once I'm done, we call it checking in, which is checking my code into source control. And the other developers will be doing the same thing, and they'll all be checking their code into what we call the dev branch. I'll talk about branches later, but you can imagine everyone checking their code into the dev branch, and it's a way of everyone, making sure that we don't lose our code, because that's very important. You don't want to spend days writing code and then losing it. So that's where source control comes in handy. And like I said, we use it to distribute code as well, because what we like to do is we like to make sure all our developers have a view of what everyone else is doing. So if I check in my code, someone on another development machine somewhere else can pull down that code and also view it as well. So that's source control. I want to talk about, we call it application lifecycle management. And I guess my role is not just developing, right? Because you can't just write code for the sake of writing code. You need a purpose. And the way it works at Electrorent is we have a few steps needed before we get to the development stage. So very quickly, an example can be that, say, one of our users needs a form to behave in a certain way. That's their requirement, right? And the IT team, what we do is we talk to them, we talk about the requirements in a little bit more detail, and we come up with a design. So a way in which we can translate the requirements into a design, what it would look like as a design in finance and operations. And then what we do next is we pass that design on to our developers, because the developers need a design to work off. So they know what they're doing, and they can correlate with that design to make sure that what they're developing is what the design is. And then you'll get to a code, and at that stage, you do the development as a developer, and then you might remember I talked about our different environments. So you can't just leave your code in your development environment, right? You need someone to test it. And that's where our different environments come into play. So we have a couple of test environments. But the key thing I want to talk about is, how do we get that code from your development environment into those testing environments? So one of the things I helped put together at Electrorent was a way to facilitate the movement of code across the different environments, right? And I'm going to introduce you to again another cloud-based application called Azure DevOps. Think of Azure DevOps as a way we collaborate as a team, and we can do a whole bunch of things in Azure DevOps, right? And we can create tasks to allocate to different people. We can keep track of the tasks they do. We have source control. The source control I mentioned sits within Azure DevOps, and a whole bunch of build and release pipelines, which I'll talk about in a bit. So let's see here. I've logged into Azure DevOps. Again, it's just a URL. I mean, you can try to log into this, but you're just gonna get thrown out, because you need an actual login and password to get into here. So I'm going to go straight to repos, and this is our source control. Here's a dev branch that I talked about earlier, and sitting within this dev branch is all the code that all the developers in Electrorent have compiled and checked in. So what we do next is we have what we call build pipelines. And what that does is, again, it's a machine in the cloud somewhere that compiles all the code within our development, within our dev branch. It looks a little bit like this whole bunch of tasks. And the whole purpose is, we've got all these developers writing code. We want to make sure that all the code, when it comes together, compiles correctly and throws no errors. And that's what the build pipeline does, right? And then one of the outputs of the build pipeline is what we call a deployable package. So you can think of that as a zip file with all our compiled code. So the next step is moving that to different environments. So again, in Azure DevOps, we have this concept called release pipelines. And release pipelines work in this way. You'll see on the left-hand side is you can think of it as all our compiled code, the deployable package I was talking about. And then we have a couple of steps here. So you've got a step called upload to lifecycle services. All the deployments we do need to go through that portal I mentioned, lifecycle service. So I have a step here where it uploads that deployable package, code deployable package, into lifecycle services. And then the next step is deploying it to our end-to-end environments. Let me just show you what these look like. Again, it's similar outline, but a couple of different tasks here to upload to LCS, and then a couple of different, well, just one task here to upload to our end-to-end environment. And this happens automatically, right? So what we like to do in our dev pipeline anyway is we have everyone checking their code in on a regular basis. And then every 5 times a day, we have this release pipeline that runs automatically, and it takes that built code and deploys it to the end-to-end environment. And that's really useful for us, because what it means is we can have developers constantly developing, and then our testers also constantly testing, because they're getting a constant influx of developed code that they have to test. The key thing here is it's all automated. And that's a really key point in developing an application, because what you want to do is minimize the amount of manual stuff you do. So we like to try and automate as much as possible. So in this cycle here, we can, just let things flow. And there are errors that pop up now and then, but it's quite rare. You might remember I also had a release pipeline. So what we do in the release pipeline is we selectively move code from the dev branch into the release branch, because there might be code that developers check in that don't work, or whatever reason we don't want to move it across. And the reason we want to move it across from the dev to release branch is because we have another testing environment where we do more testing, right? So we do a lot of testing, and we do this process called merging, where we merge our code from the development environment, so from the dev branch into the release branch. And so once you've done that, you can imagine, again, you got your release branch with a whole bunch of code, not as much as the dev code, right? Because the dev code is everything, but release branch contains selective pieces of code. And we run it through the same process, right? So we have a build pipeline called release, which builds their code in the release branch. And then we have a release pipeline for release, which very similarly releases that code, this time to a different environment. We call it train. It's just, what we call another one of our testing environments where we do more further testing. So that's kind of like a little bit of how we move code around. To move code into production is a kind of whole different step. I'm not unfortunately going to have time to show you that to you guys today, but that's more involved with the Lifecycle Services portal. So yeah, we're coming up to the end of the talk. I've talked about quite a few different processes within the application lifecycle management. So, to wrap up, what I've shown you, it is a small taste. It's definitely not the whole picture, but I'd like to think I've covered, most of the big components. Also, I have shown you tools and technologies that I use for finance and operations, right? So depending on the application you use, you will probably use different tools and technologies, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the underlying principles are always the same. it doesn't matter what application you're developing, you're going to want to have source control because you need a way to store your code, to save your code, to distribute your code. You're going to have to use some kind of integrated development environment like Visual Studio because you want to write code quickly and efficiently, and you're going to need a way to move that code across your different environments. So the underlying principles are the same. I just want to say, don't be overwhelmed. It is a lot of information, but like I said, I knew nothing about this when I started, and I just learned on the job. And nowadays it's really easy to learn because you have so many online resources that you can tap into and just accelerate your learning. But yeah, for me, I guess one day it kind of clicked and everything kind of just made sense. And then I guess, yeah, I'm sure you guys will get to that stage, and then it'll kind of just be smooth sailing from there on in. I do want to say, well, firstly, thanks for listening. I am looking to do a whole range of seminars. So if there's something here that you like, you want to know more about, or you want to know about something a little bit different, just let me know. I'm also very open to anyone that wants any kind of mentoring. So I'm going to leave my LinkedIn at the end of the slide. So just hit me up. So that's the end of today. Oh, I've got a couple of additional resources that might be useful for you. I mean, like I said, there's a whole bunch of resources online you can tap into. But if you want to know about cloud computing and application lifecycle management, I found these 2 really cool videos online. So yeah, check them out. So thanks for listening. We're into our question and answers section. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to write them into the chat, or just ask me if you want as well. Okay, we have a question from Michael. Did you prefer your role as a developer or a technical architect? Okay, so I mean, when I initially started, I really loved developing. Right, there's something cool about developing something or building something from scratch, and then other people using what you've built, right? There's something really cool about that, and I really loved developing. But I think as my career progressed, I wanted to branch out and try a few other things, like experiment with different like tools and technologies. And so when I was a technical architect, I got an opportunity to do that. And I wouldn't say I don't like developing anymore. I definitely do, but I'm more interested in the designing solution aspect of what I do, more so than the programming. But there's nothing to say. I guess the key thing is just do what you enjoy, right? Because if you like developing, if you love developing, and you want to do that for the rest of your career, there's nothing wrong with that. Just do what you enjoy. So Umesh says, how was your transition to Canada? So the way it worked for me was we had a subsidiary in the UK for Electrorent, and we also had a subsidiary in Canada as well. So transitioning in terms of work, it wasn't too bad because even in Canada, I'm still working with a lot of the people I worked with in the UK. So my job as such hasn't changed. Transitioning as in terms of my actual other non-work related stuff, it's a whole different story. But yeah, in terms of work, it's been pretty much cool. Nicole says, what was the most difficult obstacle you had to overcome when pursuing this career? For me, I would say at the very start, right? Because you leave university and you've got, a little bit of knowledge on some programming languages, but then you're kind of thrust into the actual real world where you have to develop applications, and you don't know anything about, you don't know anything about the programming language, you don't know anything about tools and technologies you use. So for me, the initial part was really hard, but for me, I took it on as a challenge, and I just because endeavor to just keep working at it and improve as a person, improve my skills, just ask a whole bunch of questions, and yeah, like I said, eventually you'll get to a point where it will just click. And I think for me, it happened maybe like, I think it's like 6 months into the job. I don't know, I can't, it's really hard to explain, but everything just kind of makes sense. And then, yeah, I just kind of built on from there. Okay, cool. I mean, doesn't look like we have any more questions, which is fine. But like I said, if you want to contact me for any reason, whatever, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. There's the link. The recording of this will be available in about a week, I think. So yeah, thank you again for listening, and yeah, hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye bye.